Donc, chers participants et
So, dear participants, welcome to the second day of this event on cross-border rail transport. On behalf of the Committee of the Regions and Eurodistrict and the MOT, I'd like to wish you a warm welcome to this second day. Just a bit of technical information before we start. For interpretation, you need to press on the little button Audio Channel Selector.
Audio Channel Selector. Ensuite, également.
And then also on the organization of the meeting, the chat function is open today. Just to remind you of that.
Le button chat. Et bien sûr, la manifestation.
And the event will also be recorded. So the Committee of the Regions will then put it on the committee website. So that by way of a few technical details. So this second day is also devoted to rail transport. First roundtable on missing links and a second roundtable on the future. So to introduce this second day, it's my great pleasure to welcome Winfried Herrmann, the State Minister for Transportation from Baden-Württemberg, and Nicolas Fontaine, Deputy Director General in charge of mobility in the Grand Est region. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Winfried Herrmann for the first introductory presentation. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Haster. I'm very happy to be able to speak to you today. Some of you I already know from other contexts. And I also know you as a result of our work on the missing links. I'd like to thank the MEPs, particularly the rapporteur Anna Grünenberg, the Stuttgart MEP. She has worked a lot on the European Year of Rail, so I'd like to thank her. On the subject itself now, from the point of view of Baden-Württemberg, it's extremely important in Europe for us to move closer together, and that goes for rail transport, of course. As a land, we are a border land with France, with Switzerland, also with Austria. And for that reason, we have a vested interest in establishing these links across borders, making sure that they are good, successful. We believe that a more networked Europe will improve transport generally, particularly rail transport and rail connections. So I'm happy that it's the European Year of Rail and the fact that it's focusing so much on how we can improve the rail network in Europe. The European Union has made major progress in recent years with regard to climate protection. The Green Deal is obviously crucial for the new concept of climate protection in Europe. In Germany and in Baden-Württemberg, we take this very seriously indeed. We consider this to be a guide to us for our policy. And various courts, a court in the Netherlands, they have issued judgments. The German Constitutional Court has also issued judgments and has asked the federal government and has said that it needs to do more for climate protection beyond 2030 in order to protect future generations. So climate protection is highly topical, and the Green Deal is a very important concept. So now we need to show that we want to put all this into practice. The transport sector is guilty of a lot of things with regard to a climate sector, and not enough has been done in the transport sector. Carbon emissions have even increased in some places. We haven't achieved nearly enough. So it's important for us to promote environmentally friendly modes of transport. The transport shift is long overdue. We need to use more renewable energies for cars, buses, aircraft, trains. And we also need a mobility shift. So we need to use the different transport modes better in a more environmentally friendly way. In Baden-Württemberg, we aim to double the number of passengers in rail transport by 2030. And that's particularly important for cross-border transport. We are currently reactivating a lot of rail routes which have been lying dormant for the last couple of decades. And we've had a lot of positive feedback. There is a broad approval of what we are trying to do. A lot of people welcome this very warmly. And some 30 routes are in the reactivation phase at the moment. So it's a huge success. At the European level and in border areas, we also have routes which have been lying dormant. And because of wars and things that have been destroyed during wars, rail connections and bridges need to be repaired. And some 76 years after the war, not enough has been done. There are commuters that move between France and Germany. There's a lot of tourism in these border regions, so more has to be done. So some links are sorely missed between Colmar and Freiburg, for example, and Rastatt and Hagenau. That is also sorely missed. In Europe, we have a number of corridors which cross borders, and Baden-Württemberg is also affected by a number of these corridors. So we are well aware that we need to improve the networks in Europe generally, but we shouldn't forget the fact that alongside the large-scale networks, we have freight transport, passenger transport, and there are a number of projects which work across borders, which are only significant regionally, but we think that this will strengthen links, and projects of this kind promote links between countries. You have to start somewhere. You have to start on a small scale and then build from that. So the EU Commission is doing more for these missing links, which we welcome very warmly, and the citizens expect this too. And the activities on the spot are a lot bigger than some people might think in Berlin and Brussels. Rémi Bertrand is somebody that we work with very closely, and I know that in Alsace you are very committed to these activities, as we are in Baden-Württemberg. But we need support from Paris, Berlin, Brussels. So providing the missing regional links, that is crucial, essential, very important for the European neighbourhood and strengthening links between countries. The big corridors are very important, but there need to be other connections as well to link them up. And we need better connections. And if something is redundant, if a particular route is redundant, a couple of years ago in Germany, in the Rhine Valley, that link couldn't be used a couple of years ago, and we noticed that it was sorely missed. And there was a disaster in Darmstadt some years ago, and this has shown us that we need to do more. And I'd like to thank Mr. Bertrand specifically for the very good cooperation we've had so far. Alongside the small projects, there are the big East-West projects which we support and which need to be extended. And I think it's necessary for us to back up these projects institutionally. And that's why we work closely together to improve things. Together, we've carried out the feasibility study for the two projects that I just referred to for cross-border transport. This is an important prerequisite to make further progress. And we have a big joint project with Saarland, Rheinland-Pfalz, and Grand Est. And we are bringing out new vehicles, working on new technologies, 30 vehicles which will link up different countries and feed into different projects. So a good neighbourly relations is what we're trying to achieve. And we're also focusing on future technologies. So this is all extremely important. And we need the European financing to make all this possible. For missing links, we receive money from the ERDF. But what we really need is true investment funds. And the regions have said that they will make their contribution, but it's equally important for states, France, Germany, to contribute to their share, and the European Union too. We need those funds. Similar to what we have for the Connecting Europe Facility programme. So these projects need to be co-financed at the European level. So that's for the smaller projects and the big projects, because the two combined will constitute a true European network. And this will provide us with a rail transport system which is fit for the future. So we have made progress with regard to climate protection. And there are now night trains again, and that network is supposed to be extended. That's a very good thing. New technologies like ERTMS and ETCS are also being pushed forward, and we're involved in that in Baden-Württemberg because we are firmly convinced that cross-border transport of this kind is part of the overall concept of the modal shift. It will contribute to climate protection, and it will also contribute to sustainability and economic success in Europe. So thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you now a very good debate. And I particularly hope that the people who are committed to these activities will continue to cooperate, and that we'll continue to have support from national states and from the EU, so that we can make rapid progress. Thank you very much.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Minister. Das war eine sehr gute Rede.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for your speech, for your summary, and thank you very much for your commitment and Baden-Württemberg's commitment. And we've already heard today that national member states have to do something, and it's good to hear that that's happening. I'd now like to pass over to Nicolas Fontaine from the Région Grand Est, who's going to give a brief introduction on that region in France. Good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. First off, allow me to apologize for Mr. Valence's absence. Unfortunately, he can't be here, neither can our president, so they do apologize. Thank you very much, Minister Herman, for your introduction. And what I have to say is along the same lines. We've talked about the good relationship between the Région du Grand Est and the region of Baden-Württemberg, and I can only say that the technicians working on both sides are excellent, and cooperation on both sides, between both sides of the border, is very good. Now, you won't be surprised to hear that among the 19 priority missing links in Europe, 9 affect France. And the reason for this is that there's been a long period in which our mobility policy was far too focused on high-speed trains, TGVs, and roads. And when it comes to the smaller railway links, they've often been neglected. Nowadays, however, due to the acknowledgement that a lot of pollution is caused by car traffic, the mindset is shifting, but the national policy needs to take into account the current state of the network, which is in a very poor state, and a lot of small lines are either missing or threatened with closure. So we have a problem of a very fragile railway network. And as you know, the Région Grand Est is the largest cross-border region in Europe. We have 4 borders with 4 different countries, and our border countries are also federal states, so various Länder. So we have 760 kilometers of border and 4 corridors that run through our region. And specifically, that means that we are the largest border region for cross-border commuters. 45% of cross-border commuters in France live in our region, in the Grand Est, crossing that border on a daily basis. And not just daily commuters, but also travelers and freight or good transportation. The main axes concerned by congestion are the ones linking Grand Est to Luxembourg and to Switzerland. When it comes to Luxembourg, our roads are completely saturated. More than 100,000 cross-border workers take those roads every day, and the same numbers, of course, would affect the railway. When it comes to Switzerland, it's only 36,000 cross-border workers, but here again, there's an awful lot of traffic on the roads. The border with Germany is much larger. Saarbrücken, for instance, when it comes to transportation in the region, we're looking at the holistic approach, the 360-degree development approach, which has already been mentioned. Our main priority is mass transit. We have an ambitious program that should allow us to achieve an equivalent usage of the railway to the usage we see in Paris when it comes to transit into Luxembourg, and an increased frequency of trains going towards Luxembourg. When it comes to Switzerland as well, we're expanding, and we aim to achieve this by 2030. So we are also very ambitious when it comes to our project with our 3 bordering German Länder. And we're looking to strengthen or even renew some of the railway lines in that area. As the minister just said, we have invested 375 million euros on a new rolling stock for the cross-border transportation. And of the 19 missing links that have been highlighted, 4 concern the Grand Est. The first link is looking at improving connections between France and Belgium, and currently there's a huge shortage of missing links. Agneau-Karlsruhe is the second missing link via Karlsruhe and Nuremberg, as well as Colmar-Freiburg, which would allow us to link up 2 large cities. So that's a project that we're very committed to. And when it comes to Nest and Trier, that's another project that we're going to be looking at, trying to get people out of their cars and onto the train. So there's a huge amount of symbolism in all this as well, but beyond the symbolic aspect, we also need to consider the short-term financial aspects and the overall state of the rail network. If we don't invest in the secondary network, then we can only expect the number of missing links to increase, and we won't be able to move forward. Our region is also heavily involved in projects to developing ERTNT in the Jura and Mosel regions. In order for the internal market to work properly, free movement, of course, is essential, and the European Union has to act firmly and decisively on the issue of transportation. We expect firm commitment from the European Union, and I come back to what Minister Herman said on that as well. We need to ensure that the missing links and establishing links where they are currently missing be a priority, and that emphasis be placed on railway for the recovery plan. Thank you very much for your attention.
Monsieur Fontaine, pour ce complément.
Thank you very much for those words on the French side. We've understood that the regional authorities are very committed, but they're expecting a lot from the national authorities and the European level. So, third round table. This is on the missing railway links. So often we've seen that this is a problem with bridges, tunnels missing that need to be rebuilt. And as Mr. Herman said, a lot of these structures go back many years and were destroyed in the war. So they need to be reactivated. So we have Rémi Bertrand, who will be speaking first, the president of the EGTC Eurodistrict Pamina. And then we'll be hearing about Colmar-Freiburg, and then Mr. Guido Beermann, who's the, or we have a representative from Nouvelle-Aquitaine who will be telling us about the Saragossa-Canfranc-Pau link. And then lastly, we'll be hearing from Mr. Guido Beermann, the Minister for Infrastructure in Brandenburg. He'll be talking about links between Germany and Poland. So we have until 11:30, so you have around 10 minutes each, and perhaps questions might be asked by participants. So without further ado, I'll give the floor to Rémi Bertrand, the first Missing Links project. This is Karlsruhe, Rastatt, Haguenau, Saarbrücken. Unfortunately, the sound is very, very bad. The speaker is inaudible and can't be interpreted, unfortunately, unless the sound improves. Apologies from the interpreter.
On a un petit problème de son quand même, Rémi. Ça passe, la technique n'est pas très bonne au niveau du son.
If there's a technical problem, the sound is very bad.
Vous m'entendez là?
Oui, c'est déjà mieux. Ouais.
C'est déjà mieux, parfait. Oui, je disais que...
Unfortunately, the sound is still not good enough for interpretation. The interpreter apologizes.
Nationaux, évidemment, il y a les grands corridors nord-sud qui existent, qui sont fléchés et dont il n'y a pas grand-chose à dire. Et après, nous, on se positionne par rapport à ces grands corridors pour nous situer entre les deux, de manière à créer des liens et véritablement, on va parler du numéro 132 qui a été retenu dans le cadre de la réactivation de la ligne ferroviaire qui est transfrontalière et qui passe donc de Karlsruhe à Rastatt, de Rastatt à Haguenau, et de Haguenau, elle repart vers Saarbrücken, vers le Luxembourg, un peu plus loin. Cette ligne est à la croisée de 4 corridors majeurs et c'est la raison pour laquelle on travaille là-dessus depuis maintenant 2-3 ans pour trouver des solutions pour mettre en place cette réactivation. Alors, l'histoire de cette ligne, ça a été évoqué par les deux intervenants précédents. souvent liées à des évolutions historiques des pays, entre les guerres aussi qui sont passées par là, des lignes ferroviaires qui existaient depuis 1885, les ponts ont été utilisés quotidiennement par des trains entre l'Allemagne et la France, mais à l'époque c'était quand même l'Allemagne, entre l'Allemagne et l'Allemagne, aujourd'hui c'est la France, mais cela a été arrêté dans les années 50 pour rester utilisé comme train pour le fret militaire principalement, notamment lorsque le temps était extrêmement actif de côté en Allemagne. Des ponts ont été détruits, des ponts ont été reconstruits, des ponts ont été cédés à la circulation routière, et c'est tout le travail que nous faisons pour réactiver la ligne dont nous parlons. Alors, nous sommes dans une zone frontalière très diversifiée. C'est le Rhin supérieur, ça va de Bâle, en faisant des raccourcis de Bâle, en passant par Strasbourg, et en allant jusqu'à Karlsruhe, Landau, dans le Palatinat. Un territoire extrêmement rassemblé autour d'une ligne centrale, la ligne bleue du Rhin, et de part et d'autre, donc nous avons trois pays, l'Allemagne, la Suisse et la France. Et c'est dans ce corridor, dans cet espace commun qui nous est commun, qui économiquement est extrêmement intéressante, mais aussi au niveau du potentiel, je dirais, du potentiel des musées, de tout ce qui est le culturel, le social. Nous vivons vraiment dans une grande harmonie, et ce qui nous manque effectivement le plus, le ministre Herman l'avait évoqué, c'est des transports publics en général, pas seulement du rail, mais aussi d'autres moyens de transport qui sont déficients sur ce territoire. Et on en a deux ce matin sur lesquels on voudrait insister, c'est Fribourg-Colmar, et chez nous, du côté du nord de l'Alsace, entre Karlsruhe et Haguenau. Ce tracé est long de 160 km. Il faudrait réactiver à peu près 58 km, une soixantaine de kilomètres. Et il y a 40 km qui sont hors de service. Les voies sont toujours là, elles ne sont pas utilisées. Il suffit donc de remettre en état le ballast et les rails, et puis de remettre de la circulation de train, que ce soit du fret ou des voyageurs. Nous sommes là sur un tronçon de ligne. Lorsque nous regardons la population qui est sur cette ligne, ça équivaut à peu près à 2 millions d'habitants. Donc c'est quelque chose qui nous paraît très très intéressant, et aussi à l'Europe, hein, qui a vu là-dedans une idée intéressante de rétablissement de liens publics entre les deux pays, mais au-delà des deux pays, aussi des régions ou des territoires qui ont été un peu abandonnés et qui se retrouveraient là de nouveau inondés par des services publics, notamment au niveau de la circulation de train. Ces créneaux manquants ont un potentiel évidemment très intéressant et important. C'est refaire un réseau de transport public sur tout le long de la frontière et au-delà de la frontière. Hein, lorsqu'on va jusqu'à Sarreguemines ou Saarbrücken, c'est quand même à 150 km, mais ça permet de relier les deux corridors horizontaux qui sont donc en Allemagne et en France. Et cette intégration est quelque chose de très intéressant qui donne beaucoup de satisfaction de part et d'autre. Le ministre Herman parlait de développement durable. Évidemment, on est en plein dedans, puisque là, nous mettons en place des liaisons et nous permettons un territoire redé, alors c'est un peu à l'abandon depuis maintenant des années, suite évidemment au fait de fin de guerre, et personne n'a pris l'initiative de regarder de part et d'autre de la frontière. On disait une compétitivité économique, j'en parlais tout à l'heure, dynamiser l'Alsace du Nord, mais aussi une partie de la Lorraine qui est tout à fait sur ce circuit, je pense notamment à Sarreguemines, et aussi une équité sociale, améliorer la vie de nos concitoyens au quotidien avec une possibilité d'être orienté à droite et à gauche du Rhin de manière facile et économique. Un potentiel passager, j'en parlais, on peut prendre en compte les premières estimations que nous avons faites, serait de 6 000 voyages par jour, une hypothèse basse, vu le nombre d'entreprises qui se situent également sur ce tronçon, mais aussi des écoles supérieures et des universités. On a l'IUT à Haguenau, puis la Hochschule à Karlsruhe, qui elle-même serait reliée à Strasbourg et l'Université européenne de Strasbourg par le biais de cette ligne. Un potentiel de 1000 personnes dans le cadre de la ville de Rastatt a été une estimation entre Rastatt et Haguenau uniquement. Des études qui ont été faites sur la ville et par le Kreis de Rastatt il y a quelques années, et puis un potentiel de raccordement du tram-train de Karlsruhe d'environ 300 personnes, 300-400 personnes. Le tram-train à Karlsruhe qui est un modèle d'aménagement du territoire au niveau de l'urbanité et du rural qui permet sur ce territoire qui compte à peu près 1 million d'habitants de permettre un développement harmonieux et permettre aussi de rentrer carrément dans le de Karlsruhe, au centre de Karlsruhe. Cette liaison pourrait être liée directement à Haguenau, une ville de 100 000 habitants. L'agglo de Haguenau fait 100 000 habitants de l'autre côté. La réactivation de la ligne pourrait avoir un potentiel particulièrement prometteur. C'est un chaînon manquant. Il y a beaucoup d'entreprises qui sont sur le trajet. La réactivation ferroviaire est actuellement très insatisfaisante, voilà. Particulièrement suite à l'effondrement du tunnel de Rastatt. Mr. Herman l'avait évoqué très rapidement, mais le fait d'avoir des incidents sur le côté allemand de la liaison nord-sud a des répercussions économiques qui sont tout de suite dans des considérations très très importantes. Ça se chiffre en milliards d'euros de pertes lorsque les trains ne peuvent plus circuler pendant 4, 5 ou 6 semaines. C'est ce qui s'était produit il y a 3 ans du côté de Rastatt. Et le fait de pouvoir délaisser côté français permettrait aussi donc à l'activité économique de continuer à fonctionner sur le réseau nord-sud. Il y a des défis socio-économiques, l'amélioration de la qualité de vie, d'assurer la croissance économique. Alors, nous avons rejoint dans notre territoire la technologie Region de Karlsruhe. C'est un organisme qui permet évidemment d'être très proche de l'activité économique et de faire de concert de manière à partager la croissance sur l'ensemble de ce territoire. Et ça aussi, ça ne peut se faire que si nous avons des liaisons et une mobilité qui est extrêmement intéressante et qui doit se faire à tous les niveaux. Enfin, on a là la carte que tout le monde connaît, hein, c'est le potentiel pour l'Europe en raison de sa position exposée, les importants corridors qui sont reliés entre eux, le RTET Atlantique, le Rhin-Danube, la mer du Nord, les Rhin-Alpes, qui sont à la croisée dans cet espace géographique qui est le nôtre, celui du Rhin supérieur. Un projet d'envergure nationale et européenne, évidemment. C'est la raison pour laquelle l'Eurodistrict Pamina a lancé depuis mai 2016 un certain nombre d'actions. On a mis en place un plan d'action mobilité de manière à comprendre déjà la réalité des choses, à savoir les leviers sur lesquels nous devions être actifs et de faire en sorte que les choses puissent aller de l'avant. Et nous sommes aujourd'hui en pleine l'étude de faisabilité qui a été financée par des fonds européens, mais aussi par les partenaires allemands, la ville de Karlsruhe, les Landes, côté français, la préfecture, de la ville de Haguenau, de la région, du département, de manière à être facilitateur, montrer que c'est un projet global, un projet isolé quelque part. Toutes les forces sont autour de la table pour permettre d'avancer sur ce sujet. En plus, nous avons créé cet espace dynamique avec nos amis, nos collègues de Lorraine, enfin du côté de Sarreguemines et Metz, à avoir des liaisons avec ces collègues. Le Conseil Flamand du mai 2021 a inscrit à son compte rendu l'examen de la possibilité de revoir et de rétablir la ligne ferroviaire entre Rastatt et Haguenau de manière à renforcer les deux couloirs européens. C'est une sorte de transversale que nous voudrions mettre en place. C'est la reconnaissance aussi que nous avons besoin de financement européen quelque part. Et nous sommes en attente, là, de manière très forte, de l'inscription de ce projet, de ces deux projets, puisque Fribourg-Colmar y est inscrit également, de manière à les inscrire au RTET européen et de manière à pouvoir bénéficier demain, si on avance sur le privé, de financement complémentaire. Un projet à moyen long terme, un soutien politique évidemment, de tout premier rang, et on a compris que côté France, il y a le Grand Est, il y a aussi les services de l'État, Il y a aussi la collectivité européenne d'Alsace, fraîchement créée, qui soutient à 100% ce projet. Il y a la collectivité de proximité Lago de Agno, la ville de Karlsruhe, la technologie région de Karlsruhe, le land du Bade-Württemberg, comme le ministre Wilfried Herrmann nous l'a encore une fois reprécisé ce matin, qui sont très très intéressés, qui sont des porteurs lourds pour permettre la réalisation de ce projet. Une étude de faisabilité qui est en train d'être réalisée, qui va se terminer en janvier 2022, et puis viendront les études fines, le problème du financement et enfin la réactivation qu'on souhaite à horizon 2030 dans ces zones-là. Voilà un peu un résumé du projet sur lequel nous sommes. Il y a les chiffres également du financement que je viens d'évoquer avec les différents partenaires qui font partie de tout ça. Enfin bref, c'est un sujet qui me passionne, qui est d'intérêt européen, qui est d'intérêt franco-allemand, qui est d'un intérêt fort pour la population et le territoire, et qui permet d'avoir un dimensionnement nouveau sur la manière d'aménager le territoire. Voilà les raisons pour lesquelles nous sommes engagés dans ce projet, et je vous remercie pour votre attention.
Merci beaucoup, Rémi.
Thank you, Rémi. We had quite a lot of sound problems that we couldn't sort out during your presentation, in spite of the tests we carried out. My apologies to participants who didn't have interpretation in English and German. We had some technical problems with Rémi Bertrand. We did try several times and it just didn't work. And as I say, there was no interpretation.
So we are sorry. You will have the presentation in English and German. Voilà, donc on va faire le maximum donc, pour que vous puissiez récupérer les interventions.
So we will make the speeches available to you. And Arnaud Clémence is next on the list, the Deputy Director General for the Alsace Connectivity Authority. He's going to present the Colmar-Freiburg line to us. You have the floor, sir. Can you hear? Can you hear us? Yes, yes. Well, good morning, everyone. First of all, I'm very happy to present this project to you, the link between Colmar and Freiburg. This fits in very well with the missing links debate and what's at stake in terms of the environment, society generally, and the economy. First slide, please. First slide. So here we have the main cross-border rail links in the Upper Rhine region. So there is a link missing between Colmar and Freiburg to link the rail corridors up. The rail bridge over Breisach was destroyed at the end of the Second World War and it was never rebuilt. So this project is also the opportunity to rebuild this highly symbolic structure. Now, the route between Colmar and Freiburg is very complex at the moment. You have to go via Strasbourg or Mulhouse with the connections, and it takes you more than 2 hours. And these are two important cities. They're only 50 kilometers apart, so it's a long time it takes to get between the two. So we've set up a steering committee, Franco-German steering committee for the project. It's co-chaired by the prefect of the Grand Est region and the Ministry of Transport of Baden-Württemberg. The steering committee has also involved the French state, the German federal state, particularly the Transport Ministry, the Land of Baden-Württemberg, the European Collectivity of Alsace, the SNCF, and the Deutsche Bahn. This steering committee meets whenever necessary, and it's going to meet at the end of the year to look at a number of things. On the multimodal study which was carried out now, the aim of the new infrastructure is to turn this into a regional planning instrument for highly populated areas. So 800,000 inhabitants around this area, 300,000 jobs. So this is going to be a major benefit of this project. This is a very attractive region for tourists as well. So the cross-border travel will be made easier. We have 22,000 movements across the borders per day, and most of these happen in people's cars, unfortunately, at the moment. So this shows you the main technical principles. If you go from Colmar to the east in Colmar, on the Colmar side, a new track will have to be created. Then an existing line between Colmar and Vogelsheim will be used, but full renovation of the track, the platforms, etc. And some level crossings will have to be abandoned. And then between Colmar and Vogelsheim, this is currently used for freight, this route. And work has been going on since 2020 to modernize the line. So some progress has been made for passenger transport. And then between Vogelsheim and Breisach, several kilometers of a new line to be built for the crossing of the Rhine. And then on the German side, from Breisach, existing line is used, Breisach-Freiburg. On the French side, there are studies currently ongoing which are going to look at what exactly has to be done. More specifically, the crossing of the Rhine. Two routes are contemplated to the north and then further south, and it's the second hypothesis which will probably be approved for technical reasons. Now, concerning the estimated travel times, it takes more than 2 hours at the moment, as I said. So this is the aim here, what you see on the slide. And maybe we can get below 50 minutes between Colmar and Freiburg. That's a possibility. Now, potential total traffic. Low hypothesis, 3,500 trips. High hypothesis, 5,900. The high hypothesis is a more likely development of Colmar and Freiburg. In Freiburg, a referendum was launched on creating new housing, 10,000 new houses. So this will doubtless increase the population around the Freiburg area. And there's also a lack of public transport on the French side. So a lot is expected of the train. So 1,900 of these trips will be across borders, which is quite considerable. And a tram study was carried out, estimated 1.4 million passengers per year, but now we're above 3 million. So we're looking at 2,040, 2,075 million euros for the infrastructure. And we are quite optimistic on the financing front for the infrastructure. And of course, there is the cost of the rolling stock in addition to that. Now, looking at this slide, this rail link is in major documents and in treaties even. First of all, the Fessenheim Agreement, which was signed in 2019, 1st of February. It's called an important symbol of the development of the territory and strengthen cross-border relations. That's what it says in this agreement. This is also referred to in the Treaty of Aachen. Among the 15 priority projects signed up to by Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron, the European Union, Germany and France have also recognized the added value of the project. This is among the 19 missing links, as we heard, as identified by the European Commission. And finally, I'd just like to dwell on this for a moment. Registration with the TEN-T, this is something that we're following very closely, going to in the coming weeks. We know that the Commission is particularly keen on cross-border links, and access to financing is very important for European interconnections up to 2027. Now, for the time being, the line is recognized as a missing link with great potential, but this needs to be officially approved by France and Germany. And the French state expressed its support for this and made representations to the EU. The German Transport Ministry has not yet expressed its support because of technical reasons. So there needs to be strong lobbying in the coming weeks so that both states get the approval of this line so that we achieve the desired results. And then on the project study, and the financing plan, the preliminary studies are currently underway. So this is a Franco-German European project, and that's reflected in the financing because Germany, France, and Europe are contributing. And just to round things off, the next steps. So at the moment, we have the preliminary studies, which will continue until 2022. And then there'll be a public debate at the end of 2022, then public consultations 2023, 2024, and then the actual construction work 2026 to 2028, and then entry into service 2028. That would be a great symbol for Franco-German relations. So that, in a nutshell, is what's happening with this line. And I'd just like to express my appreciation for my partners in the SNCF, etc. We've cooperated very closely together. Thank you.
Qui complète un peu celle de Rémi.
Thank you very much, Arnaud, which was a very nice addition to what we'd heard from Rémi Bertrand on the missing links in that region. I don't see anything in the chat at the moment, no questions. And since time is ticking, perhaps let's move on to the next presentation from Nouvelle-Aquitaine. Luc Federman, that is. You have the floor.
Monsieur Federman, vous êtes parmi nous?
Are you there, Mr. Federman?
Oui, est-ce que vous me voyez, vous m'entendez?
Yes, I hope you can see and hear me. Yes, we can. Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk to you about a project that the Nouvelle-Aquitaine region cares for very deeply. Unfortunately, the Vice President who was supposed to speak here can't be here, but due to other commitments linked to our regional elections coming up. But I'm here to talk to you about a link between Pau in southern France and Saragossa in Spain. So allow me to perhaps delve into a bit of history and then come more specifically to the project. So this is the region we're talking about, the border region between France and Spain, Pau on the French side and Saragossa on the Spanish side. The Pyrenees are 350 kilometers long, and unlike the Alps, there are no railway lines across the Pyrenees except giving access to the Atlantic and the Mediterranean corridor. So it's an important project, and there's close cooperation between the regional authorities in France and Spain, as well as the French and Spanish railway lines, ADIF and SNCF. This project had already been conceived in the 1850s, and back then they thought of establishing 5 links across the Pyrenees. You can see the little map down at the bottom there. At the end of the day, only one really ever saw the light of day. But the lines were very different on both sides of the border, and the one that was built doesn't really operate anymore. And then there's the 2 lines, of course, on the Atlantic and the Mediterranean side. So construction took quite some time, and the link was inaugurated in 1928 in Confront. Confront, by the way, is 1,200 meters above sea level, just before the Spanish border. And if we look at the years in which this line was operational, it was only operational until 1970, because unfortunately in 1970 there was an accident on the French side on the Estanguet Bridge. So that interrupted the line for about 50 kilometers. However, trains still ran on the Spanish side between Confront and Saragossa, and between Pau and Orléans. But that was never satisfactory to Nouvelle-Aquitaine. And so, starting in the late 90s, the region started to push for the re-establishment of this link. In 2000, a study was carried out, a contract involving the national level and the region, and the 2 drivers, really, for the reopening were the regional governments, Aquitaine on the French side and Aragon on the Spanish side. They were the ones really pushing for this. The Aquitaine region, together with the French state and SNCF Réseau, co-funded the complete renewal of the Pau-Orléans section of the line, which is a valley line, and then they funded the region of Aquitaine, funded the Orléans-Belledouze section of the line, which, as you'll see a little later on a map, is only 33 kilometers away from Confront. We were supported by the European Union, not just financially, but also politically. First off, in the context of the Interreg program and the POC-TEFA program, which is the cooperation between France, Andorra and Spain when it comes to infrastructure around the Pyrenees, and all that helped us reopen that part of the line between Orléans and Bedouze. Then, under the Connecting Europe facility, there were 2 calls for tender for projects in 2016 and in 2019, and that's the current program, which has allowed us to carry out all the pre-project studies. The project in 2016 was linked to a tunnel that was to be renewed, and the 2019 had to do with the railway station and the tunnel of Confront. So we were able to fund the pre-project studies all the way up to the public debate on the French side, and we will need that public debate before we can go ahead. So this axis, Pau Confront, was also included in the latest review. Now, what are the aims of this project? As I already pointed out, the Pyrenees are very difficult to cross. There's no real railway line crossing it. The rail links between France and Spain are probably the weakest in Europe. Only 3% of freight is transported by train between those two countries. So that's a long way away from what Alpine countries such as Switzerland and Austria experience. And both national governments, French and Spain, have a freight project, and the railway freight project is in line with our project. The railway freight has decreased in terms of its modality share from 20 to 10%. There's also there's 5 different aspects to this project: the economic aspect, the environmental one. Looking at the economic first, talking about travelers and freight, which I already briefly touched upon, linking important cities, including Barcelona, and when we look at Zaragoza, there's a lot of tourism, but also a lot of cars, and it would be good to shift that traffic to rail. Now, the environmental aspect, there's a lot of traffic, a lot of trucks, so it's quite dangerous. Quite a few accidents occur. There's also, however, the protected biodiversity. There's a natural park that should be preserved and protected. It's important in terms of tourism, including winter sports, and it would also allow to continue on to Santiago de Compostela. Then, when it comes to the sort of historical and heritage aspects, some of the railway stations are 100 years old, were built very well at the time, but could be renewed, as well as some of the historical tunnels. And of course, there's a societal aspect as well. There's a lot of farming, but also adventure tourism, skiing. There's a lot of potential on both sides of the border. And this little map shows you the extent of the project. And this part here is what's closed between Boudou and Confront. The entire rest of the line is operational, although a lot of it is in a poor state, so will need to be updated. And this is all a single line because it's mountainous, some steep slopes. And so there's about 33 kilometers of missing link there between Vaduz and Confront. That's what we're working with our Spanish partners on resolving. Here, a brief history of the project and the future. So we're currently carrying out the preliminary studies, and then there will be a public hearing in France, and we hope to have it operational by about 2027. The studies were funded to 50% by the European Union and cover an awful lot of aspects, including ERTMS and all the technological developments that we can expect by 2040. And Spain has a very ambitious hydrogen plan that they're working on as well. And we've selected our line as one of the 4 lines in Spain that will be using hydrogen trains. So that's also a very interesting, very relevant part of this project. We are also looking at establishing a railway highway. But when it comes for crossing the border, it will be the single track line. I'm coming to the end of my presentation here. It's an infrastructure project, but it's also a project about people, about infrastructure, and about the territory. And it needs to meet all the expectations that are attached to it. There has to be the will of various actors in the regions. So there's 150 stakeholders involved, including from tourism. I'll come back to that in a minute. So when we were carrying out our studies with a Franco-Spanish delegation, we went to a few other places that were similar, that faced similar challenges as we do, and found quite some inspiration that could help us. When it comes to the potential for freight and person, there's we hope to be able to take about 200 lorries off the road, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think that we're talking about a mountainous road, it is a huge contribution. The Confront station is 260 meters long. It's the second longest station in Europe, which is quite a feat and well worth a visit. So we've linked the white book procedure, the white paper procedure, and in December 2019 there was an event bringing together 115 participants, and I think that really allowed people to realize what was at stake and get stakeholders involved. And we also have a website that you can consult if you'd like to learn more, canfraneus.eu, and there's a video as well showing the line and really giving you an impression of what kind of an environment we're operating in. And then you may be wondering why this portrait is on the slide. It's Francisco de Goya, for those of you who didn't know, who was born near Zaragoza, Fuentetodos, in 1746, and died 82 years later in 82 years later in Bordeaux. So we hope that once this line is open in it's one that will also be in his spirit. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for that very interesting presentation. And I'm sure the two previous speakers, Mr. Bertrand and Clémence, will also be interested in that. There's a couple of questions that were raised in the chat, but they've already been answered. And as you can imagine, the questions revolve around European funding. I'm sure during the discussion in a moment, we'll have a speaker from DG Move who will be able to respond to these questions. As we see, your cross-border link has similar aspects as the previous ones, built in the late 19th, 20th century. However, you're already well enshrined in TNT and are receiving European funding. So what might be interesting for us is how can we, the TNT is being reviewed, and you managed to get involved in it, and we realize that all you have to do is convince the member states. Please tell us how you did it.
Nous avons perdu Monsieur Federman.
We've lost Mr. Federman. No. There he is. Well, I was saying that it was a struggle, certainly. And in order to succeed, you need to engage in the struggle and persevere. You know, Mulhouse is about 1,000 kilometers away from Paris, whereas the political decision makers at national level are in Paris and aren't necessarily aware of some of the more remote parts. So there's no magic formula. What you have to do is engage, write letters, invite them, go there and see them. I think one thing that helped us was that this sort of dead area, in a way, in a mountainous area, and the attractiveness of Spain and Portugal up until the crisis, at least, there was a lot of growth in those countries. And the traffic doesn't just come from Spain and Portugal, it comes from Northern Africa, because there's a lot of freight that comes in from Northern Africa via the Spanish and Portuguese ports. So there was the economic aspect that we emphasized. So in 2013, we did manage to get our line signed up to TNT and put together a very professional, a very tight dossier. And it's not a priority in the national transport policy, of course, but you know, slowly but surely. And of course, we're not at the end of our battle yet either. We still need to achieve the funding we need for the actual construction. So the battle's not yet won. But I think we've done a lot of good groundwork, and cooperation between France and Spain on this is very good, very strong. Every 3 months we sort of get together in a steering committee format, and we're starting to get to know each other. I'm starting to be known with the European Commission as well. So it's about credibility as well, and rendering the project credible. Thank you very much, Mr. Federman. Perhaps one final question. Your project is also in the global network, and you talked particularly about electrifying the line. And was this a requirement for European funding, or could it happen progressively or even later? Well, perhaps the representatives of the European Commission would be better placed to reply to this, but I can say what I know. According to the European regulation, TNT requires electrification by 2050, but we think 2050 is too late. Equally, electrification at the outset, given the studies that SNCF and ADIF have carried out so far, was simply not realistic. And that is why we opted for 2040. And we hope to be able to do it quicker if we can. And we're also looking at other types of fuel that's better than diesel, more environmentally friendly. Rechargeable batteries, for instance, biogas, hydrogen. So we're looking at all kinds of different options very actively. And there's an opportunity there because, as I mentioned, in Spain they have a very ambitious hydrogen plan, and 4 lines have been identified, including the Saragossa-Conflans line, which is about 2/3 of the entire line. 2/3 of it is in Spain, that will be running the hydrogen trains. So we're banking on that as well. And when it comes to fueling trains and the Spanish hydrogen plan, there's production plants that are planned between Raca and Huesca, so very close to our line. So we felt that 2040 was a good compromise, but if we can be quicker, we will be. Very good. Let us move on to the last presentation. And Caroline's question is perhaps a little difficult, but we might come back to it during the final roundtable.
Zum letzten,
Which brings us to the last statement from Minister Beermann. You have the floor now. On behalf of the Land Brandenburg. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Haaster. I'm very happy to be taking part in this online event today. And thank you for the presentations so far, which have been extremely interesting. I think that the subject we're dealing with today in this roundtable, missing railway links, this is a highly topical subject, particularly in the year of rail. So we've looked at Western Europe moving eastwards. So the Land of Brandenburg is also, of course, a major player with regard to relations between Germany and Poland. The Land of Brandenburg is the fifth biggest state in Germany geographically, and we have the longest border with Poland as well. And obviously, we work closely together regionally and at state level with our Polish partners. Since the accession of Poland, we've been in touch with them, because if you have such a long border, then we're natural partners, really. Brandenburg is very active in transport networks. We look at infrastructure, and we work closely together with our national and international partners. All these plans are carefully coordinated. So there are advantages with this, but also challenges, because some of the details can be quite difficult with regard to infrastructure, difficult to sort out. That brings me to my next slide. Brandenburg and Berlin. So we deal with passenger rail transport with our Polish partners. So the cross-border rail transport brings challenges with it of a legal nature, financial nature, and the current concept has been set up successfully, and we have very good relations, and the Berlin-Brandenburg Transport Authority is at the center of this. So we are at the heart of Brandenburg, as you can see, and we have this transport authority, and as such play a close role in working with our Polish partners. So in terms of what's on offer, prices, we are developing concepts. Things are often organized in very different ways with regard to passenger rail transport, so we have to bear all these differences in mind. So this is a comprehensive work that we are doing, and developing infrastructure is key. And internationally, nationally, regionally, all of this has to be carefully coordinated. And our experience has shown that caution and care are vitally important. Now, if I may, I'd like to talk a bit about some of our projects. First project is our regional 66 rail route from Berlin-Gesundbrunnen to Angermünde-Stettin. and it goes through Brandenburg. So the future metropolitan links have the problem of a lack of electrification. So these activities have not yet been completed as a result. But we have worked together to extend these routes. We have the federal transport plan, and we're trying to create 2 tracks in this area, which would then be incorporated into the metropolitan transport system. Up to 2026, the Angermünde route will be speeded up to 160 kilometers an hour, and 2 tracks will be built and electrified. So we want to speed up the travel time between Stettin and Berlin, and we hope that we can shorten travel times by around 20 minutes, an hour and a half. The second project I'd like to talk about, I think that we can go back to the previous slide, the 26 route, the Ruderlandbahn, as it's known as. So this has been one of the most successful passenger rail transport projects between Brandenburg and Poland. You don't have to change. It links Berlin-Ostreutz with Kostrin, and it links up with Godsoe and the Voivodschaften. And there's a good service on offer, and full pricing and integration up to Godsoe. There are other projects we want to pursue, but we do depend on availability of the right vehicles. And the Ruderlandbahn, we're having difficulty to modernize this system. Now, on the expected rise in demand, Berlin and Brandenburg feel that the network needs to be strengthened. 2 tracks and electrification are important. And in some cases, only diesel locomotives can be used. And obviously, that has to be changed. We can't continue with that. Now, on building the bridge over the Oder and the Warta, that is also important, and introducing 2 tracks across borders. Berlin and Brandenburg are looking towards the future, and we want this route to be incorporated into the TEN-T network in order to bring about a modal shift from roads. Because rail infrastructure is, of course, much more environmentally friendly. So Berlin-Irschau now, this is a rail route which has 2 national numbers, 6,078 in Germany and 203 in Poland. And for rail historians, this is the western section of the Prussian Eastern Railway. So we have a European perspective, and we want to increase the transport efficiency of our infrastructure. And the Berlin-Dirschau route is right in the middle of Europe. It links up the Adriatic corridor with the 2 other corridors in the TEN-T network, the Scandinavia Mediterranean corridor, and the Baltic corridor. So we want to use this and develop this further together. Moving on to the next slide. the study of the European Commission on the missing links between member states. It was looking at the need for improving regional links, and extending these links are a part of the Rail Plus program. The Polish operators are involved in that. The Leipzig Posen route, this is a flagship project of the Interreg program. Now, the Commission evaluators have looked into this, and it remains to be seen what will happen. In the final report of the Missing Link report, a distinction is made of what is beneficial and what is less beneficial. So all of this needs to be brought into line with the current cost-benefit yardsticks. Like Lubusк and Brandenburg are proceeding together proactively in the Rail Blue project. And as you know, this is a cross-border project between Germany and Poland. And the European Union is promoting this through the Interreg program. The area is Voivodschaften Lubusк and the eastern part of Brandenburg. So Märkisch-Oderland and Spree, Spree-Neiße, and Frankfurt-Oder and Campus. In the two Euro regions, the project also forms part of the overall future concept up to 2030 for the whole of the German-Poland network. And the spatial planning committee between Germany and Poland, they have approved this together with the national and regional partners. So there is now a joint guide as to how this can be developed further. The project partners for Rail Blue are the Marshal's Office of Lubusк and the Ministry of Infrastructure and Regional Planning here in Brandenburg, and also the Berlin-Brandenburg Transport Authority. So cross-border mobility for local rail transport is at the center of this. And we want to adopt a common approach to improve the transport links. In Rail Blue, we are analyzing the local rail passenger transport, and we are looking at the necessary contracts between the transporter companies, and we are looking at other service options which are then validated. But the technical core of the project is an analysis of the demand with regard to cross-border local rail transport, and we're using data from 2019, and on the basis of that, we're building a transporter model. And then there's an accessibility analysis carried out subsequently with a prognosis of demand up to 2030 and then 2050. So we're looking at operational concepts for local rail transport in 5 cross-border corridors. And all of this is needs-based, and we are calculating the necessary investments to improve the infrastructure. So on both sides of the border, we have a solid plan, a solid basis for our activities. So that's it from Potsdam for now. Thank you very much, and I look forward to the subsequent discussions. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Beerman. We have 4 minutes left. Mr. Jürgen Meyer has asked a question, and we can answer that. I think it's a question for you. As a federal state, you have a border with Poland, a lot of cross-border projects. And in the round table, we heard from Rémi Bertrand and we heard about Colmar-Freiburg. What are your special links with the Federal Transport Ministry? Well, in Germany, we have a specific situation because we're a federal state. We've heard from France earlier today, and the federal states are independent in many ways. And that has an effect on the cooperation between the Länder and the federal government. So for implementation purposes, for transport particularly, the Länder are very much involved, the individual states. 1,000 kilometers is a long way in France, as we've heard. And we heard about people donning their battle dress and having to keep it on because this is a fight. The federal government is concerned with tax revenue, of course, and it has a lot more resources than the individual Länder do, the individual states, and this leads to exciting discussions between the 16 Länder and the federal government as to how these funds should be distributed. Brandenburg is the Land, which is closely linked up with Berlin, but we still have to put on our battle dress, put our helmet on before discussions with the federal government, so that we can assert our transport priorities. So we do, and we need to help each other out. And as Mr. Hermann said from Baden-Württemberg, we are working very much on the modal shift, the transport shift. And we are very much at the center of that in Berlin-Brandenburg. We're working closely with our Polish neighbors because we have a special relationship with them. And our Prime Minister is also the Poland coordinator in the federal government. So you can see that these international relations do have a priority for us.
I'd
like to thank all participants and all speakers during this roundtable. I think that Flora, Theodora, and Caroline's questions might be answered during the following roundtable. And of course, all questions that could not be answered due to time, we will come back to. We now have a 10-minute coffee break scheduled, so please stay with us and we'll see you all back in 10 minutes.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Mon nom est Jean.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jean Perroni. I'm the Director General of the MOT, Mission Opérationnelle Transfrontalière, and I will be chairing Roundtable 4. Allow me to start by pointing out that this conference is being recorded and will be available on the Committee of the Regions website. You can follow the discussion in 3 languages. Just select your audio channel at the top under Audio Channel Selector, and you can choose French, German, or English. You can also ask questions in the chat, and we will try to answer them. I'm going to briefly introduce this 4th roundtable and, in particular, the panelists. With us today is Pascal Mongin, who is a member of the European Committee of the Regions and the ENVI Commission for the Environment and Territorial Cohesion. Also, Philippe Voiry is with us, Ambassador for Intergovernmental Commission's Cross-Border Issues and Cooperation from the French Ministry of European and Foreign Affairs. Philippe Chantraine is joining us from DG Move at the European Commission. And we also have Anne-Marie de Ronsard joining us, who is a senior loan officer for public investments and infrastructure at the European Investment Bank. During the previous roundtables, we've seen how important railway links are in cross-border territories, be it densely populated regions or less densely populated regions. We've had a look at projects that have already been successfully carried out. That was yesterday. And this morning, we've heard from actors and stakeholders who are working on fixing some of the missing links. And hopefully this round table will provide some answers in terms of what the member states and the EU can do. You will each have 10 minutes, and I'll start with Pascal Mongin from the Committee of the Regions, one of our partners in this event as well. The Committee of the Region, of course, is highly involved in cross-border regions and supports them greatly. And what would the Committee of the Regions' message be for these regions? Pascal. Thank you very much, Jean. And thank you, everyone, for joining us for this virtual meeting. And thank you also for inviting me. As a member of the European Committee, I've worked on 2 opinions on rail, at least. And during this round table, we're to talk about funding. During the previous roundtable, we heard about a number of projects that are getting underway along our borders. And I think we are all aware that one of the big issues around the missing links and connecting 2 sides of a border is profoundly experienced as something that Europe should be fixing, and citizens are very well aware of the lacks of these links when it comes to travelling, not to mention cross-border workers. Now, I'm currently in Strasbourg, but of course an urban area and a metropolis can have an impact at 360 degrees. Now, member states are aware of the priority of these missing links. It's an important challenge, and I can but repeat what the Director General from Nouvelle Aquitaine said, saying that often, these regions are a long way away from our capitals and often can be forgotten, both mentally but also in terms of funding. Now, we have we are a consultative body, but also a very legitimate body in the Committee of the Regions, because we are elected locally. And the committee started working immediately on the Trans-European Network. In 2019, there was an opinion, and we worked on another opinion for the upcoming budgetary period, 2020 to 2027. And I drafted an own initiative report in 2019 calling for a paradigm shift, or at least for a shift in point of view when it comes to railway. And that we should start asking ourselves what the railway can contribute to European politics. Not how can European policies make rail more prominent, but rather how does railway and how do railway links enhance the visibility of the European Union? It's first and foremost about territorial cohesion. We've seen that there are economic advantages. Remy Bertrand, I think, mentioned the economic impact when there are missing railroad links. So railway links are an asset for the internal market. There's, of course, also the question of cross-border commuters and people traveling long distances. For instance, if you are seconded to a different site by your employer. And of course, it plays an important role in terms of carbon neutrality by 2050. If we want to achieve that goal, we need to consider rail transportation. And it's also an advantage for European industry. Now, we saw during the health crisis, which is also the reason why we're not physically together in the same place, we've seen that railway can have a positive impact on European industry. If there are links, it connects people, but you also have to make the trains, the rolling stock, so it can have a positive impact on European industry. And so really the heart of my message is that this year, the European Year of the Rail, is an opportunity to look at what it's going to cost, yes, but also we should be thinking about how much it's going to bring in. And those who work on European affairs know this. Once you look at the cost of the non-achievement of the internal market, your point of view completely shifts. If we think about what the environmental costs and the economic costs would be of not establishing these railway links. And the final point I'd like to make during my brief intervention is equality between different modes of transportation. And when overcoming these missing links, we need to put all modes of transportation on an equal footing. And by equal footing, I mean that those that are the most polluting, those that have a negative impact on our road infrastructure should be contributing. So we need to internalize the external costs. Think of lorries on the roads. You know, the lines of lorries on our motorways, we all know that they pollute the environment, that they put pressure on the road infrastructure, and in those cases, we should look at mechanisms for funding such as the Eurovignette, for instance. These are things that we have to implement everywhere, I would say, because I see that in my country, if it's imposed in one place, then the traffic will simply move to other places, and that creates friction between different territories and an imbalance. Finally, I can recall that the Committee of the Regions is very aware of the importance of having the right governance tools when it comes to generating these links. Now, of course, the member states are important, but when it comes to specific infrastructure links such as bridges, I mean, there was the example we just saw earlier this morning in Alsace. For these sorts of projects, you need appropriate tools, and we are all aware of the potential of the European groups, the EGTCs. But it's not enough. And I would state that it is regrettable that there is a blockage when it comes to more integrating tools. The ECBM proposal, which is stuck at the moment, and it's obvious that member states are not yet ready to let go and compromise on this issue. You know, there are some very good projects, and of course the legal systems are different in each country on both sides of the border, but what we need is tools. We need mechanisms and possibilities to steer these projects. And there's all kinds of tools that are available at national level, and we need equally efficient tools when it comes to building infrastructure along borders. So the local governments along those borders need these governance tools to be able to steer the projects, to organize public tenders, and to manage the construction work and the infrastructure once it is built. So those were the main points I wanted to make this morning. So we need to take into account the benefits that establishing these missing links will bring, the importance of ensuring that some of the funding comes from other modes of transportation, ensuring the equality between transportation modes, particularly those that are more polluting, and thirdly, the importance of having governance tools, which would make the steering of these projects possible, which is often still very difficult. So those were the issues I wanted to raise, and I'm of course available to answer any questions that may arise. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pascal, for those 3 points. I think it is important to shift our point of view and to think about what these railway projects can contribute to the European project. In all countries, rail has played and continues to play an important role in terms of cohesion, but the question now is how can we look beyond our borders and take a more European approach to railway. It was also important that you mentioned other modes of transportation and their contribution. Earlier on, there was a question concerning Ireland and road freight transportation. Maybe that's a question that we can raise later with Philippe Chantraine. And thank you also for the point you made on governance tools that might make a good link to the following speaker, Philippe Voirie. Philippe, you've been very active in the Grand Est prefecture, and now you work on all French borders, and I'd like to give you the floor to talk about the approach taken by the French state on missing links and cross-border mobility. You have the floor, Philippe.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Jean. I'm very happy and honored to be taking part in this conference on a subject which we've all been working on for quite a lot of years, the missing links and taking them into account at state level. I shall present some slides to give you an idea of the framework within which we are working. My presentation won't be an official one. It's just a little insight into the administrative machinery we're dealing with, just to show how we deal with these projects and how we try to support them. So if we could move on to the first slide, please. Thank you. Well, I'm sure that you know this map by heart. this is the map of the European corridors. We also have the wealth spread, the spread of wealth here. And if you superimpose these are two maps, you can see a link between the corridors and the level of prosperity. Now, the prosperity has been around for longer than the corridors have. But the corridors were placed where the prosperity was already to be found. So there is a correlation, not necessarily a causality, but there is a link. So the corridors need to allow for the distribution of prosperity, of wealth throughout Europe. So I'll give you a specific example from my previous experience of the Grand Est region. The missing links and the transport links should bring about growth, regardless of the barrier of borders. We are in a single market, after all. And the missing links are also missing links in the completion of the single market. So here you have an employment-related map. This goes back to the period before the health crisis. This is the last map we published before the crisis. And this illustrates a long-term dynamic since the 2008 financial crisis. So employment growth around the Grand Est region, what you can see, all the warm colors, where there is more growth, and the colder colors, there is a drop in employment over a long period of time. So when employment boomed in the Grand Est, it was around the border areas, Alsace. So there too, there is a clear link. So we need to boost cross-border cooperation, and that starts with transport. Next slide. Thank you. So here you have a pyramid. Now, obviously, this perhaps oversimplifies, but this is an expression of the importance of transport infrastructure. So the line of text surrounding the pyramid, it says that any increase in supply of one of these horizontal factors in the pyramid will bring about a rise in demand for other factors, and transport is at the basis of this. So if you improve links between the two sides of a border, what happens? Well, first thing, there'll be a request from the population related to safety, or a concern might be voiced by the state. So there'll be a wish to work more, cooperate more on safety. But as links get easier and passenger flows increase, investments will materialize. So these are the two vertical arrows on the left and right of the pyramid, flows of persons, cross-border investments. And the inhabitants in border areas may want to work on the other side of the border, and they will express a greater demand for support to bilingualism, for example, or adapting the education on offer. So that's the third horizontal factor, bilingualism education. And then health will be an issue. So people might want to get health care on one or other side of the border, and the authorities will have to think about revamping the healthcare system. And there may be a coordinated approach to the offer of healthcare. And you will also have requests for a rebalancing of economic development. This is what we have between the Moselle and Luxembourg, and in the Genevois, French Genevois. So you have a concentration of production factors on one or other side of the border. And finally, something more diffuse. Higher education and research establishments will be affected by this. So here, for my brief presentation, I've taken up an example which has been broached over the last 2 days. The two lines which have to be re-established between Alsace and Germany. So this is not a perfect model, but this is an institutionalized approach, which we've been thinking about in Paris, in Berlin, in the Grand Est region, how to support these projects. You can see these two main links. The main advantage is to boost the solidity of the two European corridors on each side of the Rhine. Next slide. Here, what we have is a very recent development. This goes back to the 31st of May, and this is an excerpt from the conclusions of the Franco-German Ministerial Council. So a couple of months ago, this could not be taken for granted, but all the stakeholders involved have supported this with sufficient conviction. So this is now included in the conclusions of the Ministerial Council, 31st of May, the Franco-German Council of Ministers. Close cooperation between the Élysée and the German Chancellor's office. So this is an important step as to whether the administrations will want these links to be included in the TEN-T networks. And unfortunately, the sound has dropped out. We have no sound for the speaker, I'm afraid. And no image now either.
Philippe, oui, je pense qu'il y a un problème.
Philippe, there's a technical problem. I don't know if I'm the only one. No, you're not the only one with the technical problem, but we can't hear you, we can't see you. Here, oh, okay. Now it's working again. So where did you lose me? Well, you were explaining the fact that the Élysée and the Chancellor's office had made greater efforts. Yes, well, the Élysée managed to convince the Chancellor's office. And obviously, these things need to be dealt with at the highest possible level sooner or later. So, we have the Treaty of Aachen, which consecrates all this. The ECBM was referred to before, and what we stated in Article 14 of the Treaty of Aachen is the ECBM philosophy. So the ECBM needs to work. This is going to be tested, and we're going to use this to convince other partners of the need to push forward with ECBM. So if we move on to the next slide now, if we could do that, you can see what's happening with the Cross-Border Cooperation Committee for the Treaty of Aachen. So we want to reproduce this for other borders. Some partners are saying that we already have a good cooperation, so why do we have to duplicate this system at other borders? But the idea is to bring together local stakeholders, which is the basis. That's very good. But the Treaty of Aachen Committee has representatives of central administrations, so they are witnesses to the local debates that happen and have to provide a response. And we also have the Euro districts representative and also members of parliament. If we can move on to the next slide, I'll explain how the committee works. One important thing is that we have a work program which is short-term and long-term with immediate objectives, with immediate results, objectives which are attainable within 1 or 2 years. And then we have longer-term objectives, so transport links, for example. But the specific characteristic of this committee is that everyone has a responsibility, everyone involved. So you might say, we have a problem, hopefully the state will do something about this. That has happened in the past, and there is a French minister who said with a certain amount of humour, and the speaker's lost his sound again, unfortunately. He's now frozen. His image is frozen. Yes, Philippe, we've lost you again there. I don't think your connection is stable. Okay. So when the committee's recommendations, the classic committee recommendations arrive in Berlin or Paris, sometimes miracles don't happen. Ministers and so on might have other priorities. So the committee issuing recommendations, that doesn't always work. It sometimes works, but the success rate is not necessarily very high. So the system we have for the Treaty of Aachen involves each member raising a problem, perhaps, and that person might be made responsible for following it up. So institutionally, this person might not have competence for this. A Euro district might deal with health issues, for example, but it's responsible for following up a given subject, the partner who's raised the issue. And this has led us to good results. And this is why we have this 31st of May statement, which is very important. I'll move to my penultimate slide now to show you one of the secrets of how the committee works. We have members of parliament involved in this, and they play an essential role in 3 ways. They play the role of monitoring the executive, which is the normal role of the parliament. So the members of parliament, they exert pressure, milder or not so mild, on the administration to get things moving. The members of parliament also communicate among themselves and also issue resolutions. And they can also take on board draft laws or draft amendments which will be proposed directly to the assemblies of which they are a member. And this is a process for the Law 4D, which is going to be proposed to the Senate in July. Which brings me to my last slide. And Philippe, we can see the slide, but we can't hear you anymore. Or see you now. We can't hear you, Philippe. Well, Philippe, we can't hear you anymore. But I think that all the participants have seen your slides. So just to conclude, you've quoted the treaty, and I would just like to thank you for giving us this insight of a diplomat, an engineer, and a geographer. The World Bank 12 years ago discovered what was at stake in terms of developing territories, dealing with connections across borders, facilitating cooperation. And thank you for referring to this ever closer union. In Europe, we are involved in a project, and rail is one of the most beautiful symbols of this project, I would say. I think that we'll come back to this in the later discussion. But without further ado, I'd like to shift to the European level. I think there are great expectations of the European level. So I'd like to give the floor to Philippe Chantrenne. For quite a few years now, the European Commission has been well aware of what's at stake across Europe. This is part of Europe's DNA. Progress has been made in cooperation across borders. DG Regio spoke on this yesterday. DG Move is very involved in this, and other directorates too. So, Philippe, I'd like to ask you what instruments are available. What instruments does the Commission use? I think you'll be focused on DG Move, but there are other DGs too. Maybe you can tell us about what's happening and what instruments you're using.
Good morning from Brussels. I will speak in English if that is okay, because most of the terms I will use I'm most familiar with in the English version. And thank you for this very interesting conference today here. I would like to present briefly where we stand with the TEN-T policy, the Trans-European Transport Networks, because that has been referred to many times, and I will hopefully thereby explain what are the advantages or also the conditions for being in the TEN-T network and how we address the review of the regulation in particular. So looking back, the Trans-European Transport Network policy has been established in the 90s. And since then, Europe tries together with member states, it's a shared competence, to ensure that there is a better network for transport in Europe, better linking railways, roads, inland waterways, making sure that ports and airports are better connected to the networks. We have four main objectives when we are pursuing the TEN-T policy. The first one is cohesion. It is very important for us to ensure that all regions in Europe are well connected to the internal market, are well connected to Europe, and that requires infrastructure that allows to take part in the internal market. It's also very important to connect national transport networks. It was mentioned already several times this morning that very often infrastructure networks are planned in a very national way. Not only in big countries, I can say, it also happens in very small countries in terms of surface or in terms of inhabitants. So it is and remains a challenge to, first of all, connect these national networks into a European network, and that is what we aim for when we speak about cohesion. The second objective then is efficiency, because often it's not sufficient just to connect, because many technical parameters have to be aligned to have an efficient network. When the incident in Rastatt was mentioned this morning, indeed, physical connection would have helped to get to the French network and have a detour that way. But of course, it would have also required that all the technical parameters are there, that it works in terms of the standards, etc. So this is the interoperability, as it is called technically, is very important to ensure that really trains can run from one country to the other. A third objective is sustainability. We want to have a transport network which is in line with the environmental objectives of the Union, which we have since a long time. So we want to have a network which allows the most efficient way of transporting goods and persons. And last but not least, it's the benefits for users which we have in mind. So citizens and also industry undertakings, they need a network that works and need a network that connects well in order to enjoy all the freedoms that the European Union brings with its existence. So in 2013, the TEN-T regulation as it stands now has been adopted, which was quite a milestone because for the first time we have identified a real European network based on a European methodology, really applying one way of thinking about infrastructure across the 28 member states. This methodology has led to the identification of a comprehensive network, a very dense network, really ensuring this connectivity of all regions. And on top of that, the core network, which is really linking the main urban areas, the main economic centers, the main ports, to ensure that on these main axes, things are developed quicker because the TEN-T regulation also established deadlines for the comprehensive network. It has to be realized by 2050 and for the core network by 2030. And when we speak about having this network by 2030 and by 2050, it means that this network is of a certain quality, complies with certain standards, so that, again, interoperability is ensured that the transport can take place in the best possible way. So in 2013, the regulation had foreseen that the review would take place in 2023, but we have started the process earlier, and this is because the political context has quite changed. We have the European Green Deal that has been mentioned as well, with very clear goals in terms of reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and it requires or has set the objective that notably 75% of inland freight carried today by road would be shifted to rail and inland waterways, which are the environmentally more sustainable modes of transport. Once this European Green Deal has been in place, the European Union has adopted then, or the Commission has adopted in December last year, the Sustainable and Smart Mobility Strategy, which is the vision of the Commission on how to achieve the objectives of the Green Deal in terms of transport policy. And here again, quite ambitious objectives, but necessary objectives in order to comply with the objectives of the Green Deal. So we are speaking about increasing the rail freight traffic by 50% by 2030, and to double it by 2050. We speak about notably also high-speed rail, where the traffic should be doubled by 2030 and tripled by 2050, etc. Again, with a very strong focus on the environmentally sustainable modes of transport, railway and inland waterways, because this is seen as an important part of achieving the objectives. So we have kicked off this evaluation process, and we have done an evaluation of the existing regulation, where we have seen that many things have been working quite well. So establishing these common standards, this common deadline has really given a strong impetus and has led to a better alignment of national planning and prioritization, even though we see some room for improvement still there. We have seen that the tools we have put in place, the European coordinators and the corridors, we have seen several times already the map of the European corridors, has been a very useful way of better coordinating infrastructure planning and making sure that things are happening not only in one country, but happening cross-border and in the best case also happen in a coordinated way, but it also allows to identify bottlenecks, to identify the issues, and also to exert the political pressure when we can do so and when it helps. Since then, and the results of the evaluation we have published last month. So for those interested, they are available on our website. And now we are deep in the impact assessment. Those familiar with the European better regulation rules know that we have now to assess possible impacts of new measures we would take. In that context, we have done another public consultation with around 600 contributions, many of them coming from regions as well, and again, many of them highlighting the issues of missing cross-border links. So we are now working to present a proposal, which we hope we can do in November. And in that context, we are now precisely also in discussion with member states, because they are strong partners at the national level for the TEN-T policy. The treaty foresees that any TEN-T section has to be approved by the member state concerned to be included in the regulation. So we are discussing now with them on many of the cases we have heard today, and even more in other member states. And unfortunately, we see sometimes some resistance from certain capitals. We have seen some good news. To mention one, between Italy and Austria, they both agree to include, for instance, the line between Bolzano, Lienz and Villach into the TEN-T network. And we are very pleased about that. So we are really insisting vis-à-vis the member states to include these sections. And I think many arguments today are also arguments that we are using. These sections are important, both for the local cohesion, but also for the network perspective, ensuring that there is also this resilience of the network, that there's a way that whenever there are impacts on one line and climate change will lead to more impact on our network, we have to have more secondary routes that we can use as well. So there are many good reasons to include them. Often the fear is there that the standards would be too high if a section is included into the TEN-T. But I think here also we are trying to convey the message that we want to be very reasonable. We want only projects which are showing a positive cost-benefit analysis. We want to ensure interoperability. Certainly, that's very important. But of course, not every line is going to be used in the same way, and there can certainly be adaptations to the local conditions. I hope I've not been too long, but I'm very happy to take any question there might be. Many thanks.
Merci Philippe. Mais j'ai envie tout de suite de...
Thank you, Philippe. I do have a question for you immediately. Now, we've understood that the TEN-T network has been doing a lot of high-quality work over the last few years, and we've also heard that member states need to cooperate, take the right decisions. You alluded to that. I would also like to know from you as a representative of the Commission. Yesterday, one of your colleagues from DG Regio gave an excellent presentation on the role of Interreg and how governance can be improved, but Interreg isn't going to fund all these projects by itself. It also mentioned the role of the ERDF, and I don't know about Eastern Europe so much, but in Western Europe, and certainly in France, the ERDF funds cannot be used to finance transportation projects. And at the end of the day, I do get the impression that there are some very good projects out there that we've talked about yesterday and today, but that things are moving a bit slowly. There are regions and states that are carrying out studies, that are doing public consultations, but then it takes years for these projects to actually materialize. So I'm interested to hear from you as the Commission. I mean, maybe Parliament and Council have a part to play as well, but aren't there still some gaps, perhaps, in the availability of funding for these projects? Yes, I mean, the problem is that there are many different levels that all need to pull in the same direction for this to happen. I think that there's a lot of complementarity between work being done by the regions within Interreg and the funding that's available there. And it would be only natural, from my point of view, that a project that has completed the study phase, that has proven its feasibility, that these projects be included in the TEN-T network, at which point we will be able to come in with the Connecting Europe facility funding. So, for me, the challenge is to ensure that the various levels that need to agree are all playing their part, and this involves a lot of different actors, the transport ministries, finance ministries, etc. So the real work consists of that, and we've heard that it can be very difficult to keep fighting the battles that need to be fought for this, but on our end we're very open to these sorts of projects, particularly if they've already received European funding in the pre-project phase in order to establish these lines. Thank you very much. I'd now like to round off the first round of speakers by giving the floor to Anne-Marie de Ronsard from the European Investment Bank. We've talked implicitly a lot about subsidies, but there are also other financial tools out there, other financial means, which may come in as well. So I'd now like to give her the floor, Anne-Marie de Ronsard. And again, I remind participants that questions can be raised in the chat, and we should hopefully have about 15 minutes at the end for debate. But Anne-Marie, you have the floor.
Alors nous voyons
We can see your presentation, but we cannot see or hear you.
Je ne sais pas si la régie
Maybe our technical support can help. Do you see Ms. de Ronsard? What's going on?
Madame de Ronsard, je suppose qu'il faut vous appuyer sur...
I assume you would have to push the speak button, Ms. de Ronsard.
Oui, il y a bien une demande vous avez demandé la parole, donc il faut que quelqu'un vous...
Right. So you've raised your hand. Maybe someone needs to open your mic then, and then you should press speak.
Bon, écoutez, moi j'ai pas de nouvelles, alors peut-être en attendant, peut-être que le problème technique...
Okay, well, let's hope that we can resolve this technical issue, and maybe in the meantime I can relay a few questions from the chat. And there was one that was raised during the previous panel discussion on Ireland, which I think Mr. Chantraine might be well placed to reply to. There's two questions on Ireland, in fact. One on the fact that there's a railway project covering the whole island of Ireland, but there are concerns about what Brexit is going to mean for this project. And then there was one more specific question on competition with road freight. So maybe Philippe can provide some answers to those questions while we wait for Ms. Donsard.
These are two very good questions. I mean, first of all, I think the European Union has been very instrumental in supporting the line between Belfast and Dublin, and it has always been a very good line to support. So we are really keen also that this development continues. On Brexit in general, I have unfortunately to say that for the time being, the focus is really on implementing the agreements that have been reached on Brexit. And there's very little appetite on both sides to come back on it. Unfortunately, in the agreements that have been reached, there has been no specific provision on the trans-European transport networks, which will possibly lead then to a situation that in the revision, the maps of the UK will be withdrawn, and we will have no longer the maps of the UK in our regulation. Because any inclusion of such a map would require a bilateral agreement between the EU and the third country concerned, which is possible because we have such maps for other third countries in the Western Balkans with Turkey, etc. But then on the question of the network, we are quite aware of the studies that are going on in Ireland. We are in contact with Ireland, of course, also in the context of the review of the TEN-T regulation and looking at the developments there. The situation of Ireland is, of course, very particular because of the rather short distances, and usually on the continent, rail has this advantage of bundling transport flows over longer distance, and this is where the efficiency gains are the highest. This being said, we also know that there's quite an interest on the side of ports, for instance, to have better railway connections, and of course, again, the standards that we have in the TEN-T regulation can, of course, be adapted for such isolated networks as in Ireland. Probably not necessarily have full-fledged 740-meter trains on that island for the rather short distances, but nonetheless, rail can be a good way to also carry freight in Ireland. And I mean, we are happy that in the study that the Irish that is done in Ireland takes this freight aspect fully into account, and we are looking very much forward to the results.
Merci beaucoup, Philippe. Alors...
Thank you very much, Philippe. Now, I hope that Anne-Marie has been able to reconnect. I know that René Laurent Balaghi is able to hear us and may be allowed to speak. Is there anything new from the EIB? It appears that René Laurent's appearing on the screen. Can you hear me? Yes. I'm trying to put on my camera. I'm not very well dressed because I didn't think I was going to be taking the floor. I'm a bit more casual, but let me see if I can get the camera to work. Anne-Marie does appear to have some huge connectivity problems. Maybe she'll come back later, but I can perhaps kick off so that we don't lose too much time. Maybe, yes, we can see the slides here. Okay, she's also changed her presentation slightly, but yes, what I'd like to do is perhaps recall a few facts on the European Investment Bank. I think that most people here are aware of our size and the fact that we are the largest investment bank globally when it comes to loans and the scope of projects that we support. So that's a bit of a general overview of the EIB. I think it's okay if I speak in French, yes. This slide gives a bit of an overview of the way we work. We have some strong specializations because we focus on development and innovation, environment, the infrastructure. So we do have a tradition of funding large infrastructure projects, including rail projects. And I think there's a few examples of projects coming up later in the presentation. And there's another project that's still ongoing that I have in mind that I could talk to you about. So we are quite used to working with large infrastructure projects. We have sort of classic loans, but also different kinds of loans. We also work with blending resources and contributions. So yes, the blending, combining various EIB financing funds and loans. And we also fund projects that wouldn't normally receive loans from banks. There's one project that we worked on in the northern Alsace at Germany, Panama, and certainly for this kind of a project to be financed, there would have to be other funding behind it, but we have means of doing this. And then there's also advisory services which we provide, and that allows public services to receive advice from us on eligibility of their projects, and cross-border projects are often funded by the bank, the cross-border element being one of the things we pay particular attention to. Then down bottom left-hand side, that's a brief overview of the project cycle, starting from the proposal, and then it needs to be analyzed, the societal, environmental, economic aspects inspected. So we have experts from various backgrounds analyzing the project proposals, and then there's a certain degree of flexibility to adapt perhaps the project and following the signature and the project development, there's monitoring and reporting on the project, and then final step is the repayment. Usually we do not fund more than 50% of the total project cost, and no more than 50% before an appraisal mission has taken place on the project advancement. So there are certain eligibility criteria, which I've already mentioned, as well as the option of having very long-term funding of up to 32 years. But the life cycle can also be adapted depending on the way in which the project evolves, and there's also the possibility of grace periods for the first 5 years. If we move to the next slide, I think that's the same one as I'd seen before. That's the distribution of loans attributed by the EIB across Europe. So you can see that France has received quite a bit, 8.9 billion euro. That's just the EIB loans, but there's a fund as well, the development fund, that has also contributed. So you see France, Spain, Italy, as well as Eastern Europe. Those are the places where we tend to support projects. These are some examples of cross-border projects that we have funded. A French-Spain initiative on electrification. We haven't received a lot of rail projects, to be honest, yet, but we'd be very happy to provide support to such projects, to provide loans when it comes, the Saarbrücken Darmstadt line, for instance. So this was a high-speed connection, and it was a French-Spanish project. 175 million euro was the direct loan that was given to France, and the same to Spain. And then there's another example at the bottom there of a hydroelectric development involving third countries. And there's another project that I want to talk about that isn't listed up here. It's a Franco-Italian project. And we're responsible for various regions. And in my region, we're working together with various regional governments, and there's a service platform, an advisory platform, and we're looking at reactivating the rail link between Italy and the Côte d'Azur, so Nice, to do a railway link that exists but that could be further developed. And the idea is to develop it further to ensure better communication or better, quicker links between Turin and the Côte d'Azur. So we do pay close attention to the cross-border aspect of projects that we attribute loans to, because we're well aware that the bank and the European Union in general needs to provide an added value. So any cross-border projects are likely to be viewed favorably, be it Franco-German, Franco-Belgian, or any other borders across Europe. We work according to geographical areas, as I said, but we're happy to work together, and me and Anne-Marie would be more than happy to help. So please do contact us. We're very open to project ideas, and some projects aren't on our radar. Perhaps if they're particularly national in nature, but if they have a European aspect to them, then you can certainly count on us. Thank you very much, René Laurent. And I'd now like to invite participants to put their questions in the chat. I think we have about 5 minutes before the closing speech. And maybe there's a few questions that I can pass on that have been pending since this morning. Often questions linked to specific missing links, specific infrastructure, and maybe I can just mention them and pass it on to all speakers of the panel, and maybe the European Commission representative would have some insights. We've got a question on Greece, the Strasbourg-Frankfurt link. But maybe Philippe Voirie can answer this one. You described a system that seems to be working quite well, the cooperation between France and Germany, the Treaty of Aachen, cross-border cooperation along the Franco-German border. So my question to you, perhaps, Mr. Voirie, would be, what about some of the other borders? I mean, we've heard brief examples from the French-Spanish border, but there's also the French-Italian border, French-Belgian border, and what needs to happen in all of these different countries in order to perhaps come up with a coherent European even system, or something that would move in that direction. So I'd like to give you the floor on that, Philippe.
Oh, merci beaucoup, Jean. Merci.
Yes, thank you, Jean, and thank you to the other speakers. This was all very enlightening for me. So at the moment, we are trying to disseminate the Treaty of Aachen principles, which seem to have proved their worth. So we're doing this with Spain, with Italy, on a number of aspects. Now, obviously, it takes two to tango. And we've lost Philippe again. We can't hear you, Philippe. I think you have a connection problem. Philippe, are you there? Philippe, we can't hear you. Okay, you can hear me again, right? Okay. So we're trying to use these good ideas and apply them to other borders. So to spread the experience of Aachen. So we're also talking about possibly adopting derogations to the rules, to the legislation. And we'll see what our Spanish and Italian colleagues have to say if they want the same thing. On the Franco-Belgian border, we haven't made such progress. We haven't formalized our approach there. There's no new generation agreement as yet covering all the different levels, the Euro districts, the local representatives, central administration, plus members of parliament, to solidify the whole process. So we haven't done that for Franco-Belgian relations, but we are working closely together nonetheless. And I think that we can deepen that work. And I'd like to thank the Grand Est region, which has helped us a lot. And I think that the political representatives in France are planning on meeting their counterparts in Brussels and maybe a meeting with the European Commission if the representatives there are available. So I think that things are gathering momentum. Yes, thank you. Well, we are drawing to the close of this last roundtable. We haven't answered all the questions, but I think that we have a better insight into who to contact, who to talk to. So the Commission is doing a lot to DG Regio, DG Move, primarily, and they're in close touch with our respective countries. Before I give Karl-Heinz Lamberts the floor, what about the Committee of the Regions? Did you get the answers you needed, that you were hoping for? Yes, thank you. Well, I don't particularly want to take the floor again, but I think what we can see, I can only talk on behalf of the Committee of the Regions, but I think that there is a good deal of goodwill. I'd like to thank Mr. Voirie. It's more than goodwill, in fact. There's a true effort on the part of the countries involved, the states involved. And the committee is willing, where necessary, to provide tools to come up with or to pass on proposals which are made to the right people. And in terms of the opinions and recommendations produced by the committee, well, our institution is a place where experience is transferred. That's what we are doing. And I'd just like to say that we are available to you to help in any way we can. Yes, thank you, Pascal, and thank you to the panelists. Thank you to the participants. So, I'll give the floor to Karl-Heinz Lamberts, President of the Association of European Border Regions. He's doing us the honor of being present today. I'm very happy to give you the floor, sir. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, participants, first of all, I'd like to express my joy at being able to say a few words at the end of this conference. My whole professional life has taken place in a small border region between the Netherlands and Belgium, Luxembourg. So cross-border cooperation has been part of my activities for almost 50 years. It's always been involved in my career. Cross-border cooperation is hugely important. Europe is small compared to other continents, but we have the highest density of borders between countries. These are often wounds of the wars. but we need strong networks for the future of our continent across borders. So cross-border cooperation was, is, and remains highly topical. And the pandemic has proved how important it is to work together across borders to make sure that that works. And in spite of all the efforts made in Europe, we've seen that the first national reflex is always to close the border in a case of a crisis. And there are obstacles to cross-border cooperation. And the COTER Commission in the Committee of the Regions emphasized this in a recent report. And this is also very clear in the Commission communication of 2017. And I think there's going to be an update of that, if I'm not mistaken. So cross-border cooperation. This is something that we can say a lot about in theory and also in terms of people's basic values. So that's one thing. But what about practice, putting things into practice on a daily basis? Looking at what happens on a daily basis at borders or doesn't happen. And really, the devil is in the detail. And this meeting has made that abundantly clear. Train connections are more important than ever. These are not something that are part of the past. In the past, some links have been abolished, but now they are more timely and significant and important than ever. If we want to organize Europe in a way whereby our transport policy and our climate policy both move in the right direction. And I shall switch to French now. And I'd like to begin this part of my presentation by extending a warm word of thanks to the MOT and Eurodistrict Pamina for organizing this meeting with the active support of the Committee of the Regions. Thank you for organizing this two-day seminar, and congratulations on making it such a success. This has brought together more than 200 people online, and this has allowed us to celebrate with dignity border regions and also celebrate the European Year of Rail. The 4 thematic roundtables have truly proved to what extent these subjects are relevant to us all. Cross-border rail is at the heart of many cross-border regions already. This is helping living areas, communities throughout Europe. And we need to fight to convince states to provide the necessary funding to develop them. We've had to organize governance in many of these territories. We've had to get the transport operators to work together to provide multimodal services which are regular, easy to understand, and attractive to inhabitants, the people living in border regions. And I really know what I'm talking about there. I know to what extent these operators are still stuck to their differences and often don't feel the same way as other operators. And there are huge opportunities on the two sides of different borders. The second morning was devoted to missing links, so this morning. And we had some very relevant presentations of projects which are being enthusiastically pursued. And the value of these projects is recognized by the Parliament, the Commission, the Committee of the Regions, but there are still obstacles, economic, political, legal obstacles, and all sorts of other obstacles. Because saying that you support something is one thing, but actually doing it is often something quite different. Especially when you're talking about spending money on these projects. So I think we should appeal to member states to give the green light to co-financing. That needs to be guaranteed. Everyone has to get down to plugging these gaps which still exist in different places in the European Union. Those gaps need to be bridged. And if you look at the map, very often with connections between the east and the west and the north and the south, there is still much to be done. This is something that needs to be looked at with the technical experts. So there is a great opportunity now with the new phasing of the European funds and in the light of the COVID crisis. And I do hope that everyone will do everything they can, because we need to act now. And as mentioned in the last round table, in the Treaty of Aachen Committee, France and Germany, well, there are representatives from all quarters, and there's been an agreement on two very important projects, and this is an example that could be followed elsewhere. The big projects need to continue, but we shouldn't just focus on the major axes, the main routes, but also the smaller missing links, because often those are highly relevant as well. In any event, there is still a lot of work to be done. Sometimes you can have quick wins, but often this kind of work is a long haul. You need to persevere and be determined. And you also need to mobilize. You mobilize as citizens so that they do what is required. We also need the necessary instruments. And it's of crucial strategic importance to work on the ECBM regulation, which has run into so many difficulties. Technically speaking, it's not all that complex, no more complex than a lot of other projects. But the sacrosanct principle of national sovereignty is perhaps proving to be a problem, and I do hope that we can move forward and overcome the obstacles. And perhaps the upcoming presidency of the Council will make further progress. So, dear friends, the time has come for cross-border cooperation. Now is the time. We need to eliminate the remaining obstacles which have existed for decades. We need to increase compatibility, because more mobility can lead to more obstacles, which prompts the need to make sure that everything runs smoothly. And we systematically need to work on integrated cross-border development strategies. And I think the Cross-Border Citizens Alliance is something extremely important, and thank you again to all those who have brought this into existence. We need to intensify and better structure the cooperation bodies, bringing together regional partners. And I'm thinking about the MOT primarily. We need more intense cooperation. because we have a real window of opportunity here, and it would be unforgivable to miss this chance. We also need to intensify cooperation with the Council of Europe and the European Union generally, and also the Committee of the Regions here in Brussels. There's still a lot to be done there. And at the next plenary of the Committee of the Regions in July, we're going to be having an exciting debate on that. The conference on the future of Europe is relevant here. The first meeting is going to take place next Saturday in Strasbourg, finally. And I will have the privilege of taking part in that. And I am committed to get the message of the cross-border regions across and stress how important it is for us to continue cooperating. And whenever we get the chance, we need to stress European cohesion. It's not just about relations between capitals. Cohesion is about where the citizens live, in the smaller areas, in the regions. And last but not least, in cross-border regions. The health crisis has hit border regions very hard, public services, etc. But I think that they will emerge stronger to deal with the ecological transition and face the challenges of the 21st century. And perhaps inspired by this conference over the past 2 days, the cross-border rail system will be a symbol of moving forward into a brighter future. So thank you very much, and all the best to all of you with your future work in this area. Thank you.
Merci à tous et à toutes.
Thank you, everybody.
Vive l'Europe!